connect with the kids.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2:00, and I will call the Ensuring Sustainability Advisory Committee to order. And we will begin with doing a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation. We also recognize the Métis, whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. We extend our gratitude to all Anishinaabe, and the Métis peoples and their descendants, past, present, and future, who continue to care for and inhabit these lands and tend these waters. I would just ask that we all just take a moment of reflection just before we begin the business of the advisory committee. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest or the general nature around the horseshoe? Seeing none, it's fine. We were going to have a presentation, but we are not. Is that correct? Yes. Yes, that's fine.
Well, I don't know if it was going to be an actual presentation, but we don't have any presentations today.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Public participation. Members of the public are encouraged to provide the committee with their comments and questions. Presentations must be prearranged with legislative services before the agenda is released. Members of the public who wish to make a deputation about a specific agenda item at the meeting must register in advance with legislative services by 4 p.m. on the day prior, 2025, by contacting clerk@meaford.ca or 519-538-1060 extension 1110. Presentations are limited to 10. Deputations are limited to 5 minutes. Are there any deputations on the agenda this afternoon? No. Thank you. We will move into the approval of the minutes, and it's been some time since this advisory committee gathered. It was back in October. So, recommendation that the minutes of October 2, 2024, that meeting of the Ensuring a Sustainability Advisory Committee be approved and presented. I have a mover and a seconder. Moved by my co-chair, Member Forder, and seconded by
Can I second it?
I'll ask for that within the next few seconds. Seconded by Member Lewis. Now, are there any errors or omissions to those minutes? Member Lewis.
Yes, I have sent some earlier, and I can talk about them now, or
Yes.
okay. Right, so then I better find them. So in section 4, there were 2 action items that were discussed that were not reflected in the minutes. The one is ongoing conversation with Mind Your Plastics to develop a recommendation to council to develop a ban on single-use plastics. And the second is to give council a heads up that our committee will be working on a notice of motion regarding reduction of plastic, including developing a policy. In section 8, committee briefly discussed the climate change mitigation and resiliency project being carried out by the municipality.
What was that again on the budget?
No, the climate change mitigation and resiliency project that is being carried out by the municipality. I can give you more details. I mean, that's something I think we just raised as an item for future discussion.
We can,
As I recall. And then the other one is we briefly discussed the green development standards, which are now called Future Ready Grey Matrix, which is being developed by Grey County.
Mhm.
And we asked that Grey County staff come be invited to the meeting to present their work.
you have, there's about 4 things there that,
For you, Mr. Chair, those changes have all been made.
pardon me?
All of those changes have been made.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So then, with calling to approve those minutes, all in favor? Thank you. So today, under our items for consideration, we had a very good and wholesome discussion back in October about single-use plastics. And back in October, if I can just reflect back, was in item 7. This committee discussed the potential for a policy for the municipality with regards to single-use plastics, waste management, difficulties of implementation for every level of governance, and the importance of implementation in schools, potential collaboration with businesses, having a cultural shift, the role of municipality in making changes, and benefits to the community outreach through education. So that was quite a bit that we talked about. But today, we want to pick up that again, because I believe that single-use plastics in the discussion that we had, I think that that is something that, as member Lewis has just talked about, that is something that I believe today we should kind of get a little better handle on for how this committee can have a recommendation come to council for council's consideration. So without me talking anymore, I'd like to open up this discussion for ideas. And if I can plant some seeds, what events would this lend itself to? Kind of what would it look like? And do you have any ideas for incentives for those that may wish to make a change? So those are just some seeds I threw out there. So I'm opening this up now to the members to carry on with a good discussion on single-use plastics. Member Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, very important discussion and something that I'm very passionate about. So with regards to the advisory committee making a recommendation to council, what other municipalities have typically done, and it's not necessarily through an advisory committee, but council has given direction to staff to provide a report with regards to the feasibility of a phased implementation of a corporate plastic ban policy. And that looks a little bit different in every municipality. But of course, Ajax is a great example of a municipality that was also working with Mind Your Plastic, and they were able to, in March 2020, the Ajax Council approved a corporate ban on single-use plastics. And this was a 5-phased plan that focused on internal operations, but also included public awareness campaigns to encourage local businesses and residents to reduce single-use plastics. So if this committee is to provide a recommendation to council for consideration, that might be the approach that we want to give, is for council to direct staff to provide a report with regards to the feasibility of implementing a phased approach to a corporate ban on single-use plastics. So I'll leave it there. I'll let anybody else jump in, and I can jump in
Yep,
as needed.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member Lewis?
I did a bit of research, which is slightly different. I must say I was scrambling. The first thing that really struck me is that, in fact, the Canadian government has a ban on single-use plastics. It is already in existence. It's been in existence for a few years, and it is being challenged, and that may well be one of the reasons why you're not seeing a lot of uptake. So we would be simply reinforcing a Canadian government's ban. My feeling, though, I also looked around at some bylaws that were in place. Guelph has one, Vancouver has one, Toronto has one. They really focus. So let me just look here and tell you what I found, if I can find it. So the Canadian government. Oh wait, no, sorry, I don't see it here. So I'll stop. They basically focus on things like beverage containers, so cups for coffee and so on, and then things like straws, takeaway food containers. They really focus quite a lot on styrofoam cups, for example, is one of the items that is specifically identified. Plastic straws, and they have a requirement of asking either, like, they don't provide these things automatically, but they would say something like, put up a poster that says, we will accept your containers, beverage containers. So encouraging people to bring their own cups. There are certain regulations around those cups. For example, they need to be safe for use. They need to be clean, things like that. Black plastic is something that seems to be specifically focused on, as well as styrofoam. So they're quite simple. The bylaws are actually quite simple. They're just like basically 2 or 3 things. And then of course, plastic shopping bags. And then one of the other ones I saw was that the requirement then would be acceptable to provide paper bags. The paper bags needed to be composed of at least 40% recycled paper. The other thing that really struck me, which I think would be something I would be quite happy to support, is education. Like just raising public awareness, because, I'm sure everybody has been reading a lot about microplastics and how they're now, they've crossed the brain, they've crossed some sort of important barrier in the brain, so they're entering our brains now. I read very recently that they're finding that the uptake of microplastics in plants is starting to impact their ability to photosynthesize. So, the impact of these microplastics are significant, and they're significant for our health. They're going to be significant for the health of the environment and for our food and so on. So I think some sort of policy that, some sort of program that would be run by the municipality that would raise awareness, maybe in the schools. Brandon, we were just talking about going to schools, would then create the kind of voluntary desire among, hopefully, the voluntary desire among citizens to actually themselves reduce the amount of plastics that they use, because these single-use plastics are a very, very small component of the amount of plastic that is in our world at the moment. I know that when Rob was at our last meeting, I think it was he who was questioning, we're recycling our plastic, but we don't really know where it's going. We're hearing a lot about it being dumped in third world countries. So there's been a lot of information provided in the news, but I think a lot of people's lives are very busy and maybe they're not receiving that information perhaps in the same way as someone like me who's retired and has time on my hands would get it. So I think that there would be ways that the municipality could raise the awareness in Meaford about the dangers of plastics. I think that was a bit rambling, but
No,
there are some ideas that I have.
thank you for that. It's basically, the thinking that you've just expressed is basically where we were back in October. We had actually asked about, costing and education. The outreaching to our community through education, and particularly the cultural shift. Carmen, do you have anything on this, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Val. When you were bringing up the idea of the takeaway, it reminded me of this program that they had at Humber when I went there. So the food department had these dishes, and it's called Friendlier. So the idea is that you pay for the container that you get your food in, and you get it back when you return it. So that the idea is that all of the containers are cycled through repetitively. So if I wanted to, if I was on my way to class and I didn't have time to sit down and have a meal, I could take a takeaway container away with me and bring it back and then get that deposit back. I'm not suggesting that we introduce more plastic to Meaford by purchasing that, but I feel like this is a strategy that we could implement here with local businesses where they could have their own dishes and charge a deposit fee, and then you could have once you return it is when you could get the deposit back. That's just an idea. It worked pretty well at Humber, and I think so. And even if you suggest having, you bring your own plastic, and if it's clean, because I feel like a lot of that stopped with COVID and you couldn't hand over your cup or your reusable water bottle. So I think it's important that, we do have sanitation in effect and we can re-implement these strategies now. So, and I looked up this Mind Your Plastic. I wasn't at the last meeting, so I don't know if we're working with them. But again, these are strategies that they're providing that I feel like we could mimic or find a strategy for, such as it had an assessment tool where you can audit your own business waste and an audit and detecting weak points. I feel like that would be interesting to see how we could do that personally in our households, but also in businesses and as a community of Meaford. Well, for me.
Yeah, thank you. That last comment, actually, the municipality will likely have some pretty good stats on where we are with the amount of material that we're actually putting through currently, and our desire would be to really reduce that even more. That would just benefit everything. Another thing that we talked about was promoting the refillery stations. And I went and I found out for myself that down at the Meaford Hall, there's a refillery station. Just walk inside the door, and I've been down there many, many times, and there's a sticker on the outside of the window that does say it's a refillery station. And another one at the library. I believe that there's one there. I'm thinking that we need to advertise, we need to promote what we already have and promote businesses without being maybe too singular on some individual for-profit company, but we need to have a messaging out there that there is an alternative than simply just purchasing a one-time item and being done with it. So I had thought about, and I had requested a presentation today, which we can still have in the future, about our corporate communications policy, about the budget that the municipality has for communications, what kind of tools would be available for us, how we could start very positively putting the seeds in people's minds about what we're talking about, how we can make a difference individually, and then, like you said, Member Lewis, then collectively we could have something happen. So the notes that I had from back in October were about that, the promotion of our refilling stations and how we can do that. And at our pre-meeting, and I want to bring this now before you all, how can we, and even if it means some costs, have any ideas that we can talk about for, particularly in my mind, it's young people. We get that generation as they come up, they will look upon the generation before. What were you doing when you were doing that, when you were buying that, you're tossing it out? Is there anything that you have that maybe when we have Canada Day and we have Summerfest and we don't want to have a bunch of throwaway bottles, do you have any ideas for the young people, what they can get? I'm going to tell you one that I had. It's a stamp on their wrist. The stamp would be minimal to purchase. And if you went to a refillery station and the young people line up for that and they go, see, I got one. It didn't cost anything. What did you do? I have my water bottle filled up. Yeah. I don't know. It's just little things sometimes can go a long way. So I don't know whether I'm on target with that or you have other things. And I'm really open for other things because, you know, the municipality, you know, we could do our own water containers, a thermos type. Now we're talking money, we're talking budget. But do we wish to enter into budget? Do we wish to start saying, this is not going to be for free. Things may cost us money. What do we need to do? Because if we don't start putting some money even now or next year, when will we? So I'm open to that. So Councillor or Member Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. This is a really good point of discussion here. Sustainable initiatives are never free, right? So even when we look back at the like the Nelson Street parking lot, and when we were to explore the different options for redoing that parking lot, we could do a standard parking lot, which costs X amount, but we could look at more sustainable parking lot models, which come at a higher price point, and the scale just goes up depending on how advanced you want to go. So we have to look at a couple things. Sustainability is an investment, right? And so that's a really important mindset that we have to have. So we should go into it knowing it will cost more, but that's also an investment in our future. It's very difficult to be sustainable as a municipality, to be sustainable and reduce our costs at the same time. That might take a little bit of creativity. But I think with regards to what we've been talking about here, two things from a public perspective is the public education component is extremely important because people need to understand the impacts of their actions through their consumer behaviors, particularly when it comes to single-use items. And it doesn't even have to stop at that. So the education component is critical. And then, of course, the incentive component, because many people live very busy lives. And if, like Carmen's example of the reusable takeout containers, It's wonderful, but for a lot of people, the idea of bringing something back is inconvenient, right? And people don't want to be inconvenienced, so it might just be easy to throw it in the garbage. I do know a number of restaurants around here that do implement that model. Like I was at Bruce Wine Bar last night and they do that. They take a 50-cent deposit, you bring back the clean container and you get the deposit back. It's not a lot of money, but that's their system and they do quite well with that. I know Amici's also implemented that a number of years ago. So we do have some businesses that have been a little more ahead of the curve in terms of thinking about their takeout containers and things of that nature. But the real thing is, how do you incentivize people to go the extra effort? Because a lot of people will do it because it's good for the environment and they recognize that. So that is an important thing for them. So they will do that because they care about it. But what about the other people that don't necessarily, it's not that they don't care, but the things that they have to do to be more sustainable are more work. And it's the things that they don't normally do in their day-to-day routines. So how do you incentivize people? So the education component is one part, but you also don't want to scare the pants off of people thinking that, many people focus on the doom and gloom component of the future. And, you do need to focus on that to a degree, but you also have to focus on the positive things that you can do for your community based on your actions, and leading by example and other people seeing that. So that is the real trick, is not only how do you educate the public on their behaviors and the impacts of their purchasing, and their consuming, but also how do you incentivize people to go that extra mile to make that sustainable leap. And so I think that's something that a lot of businesses and municipalities do struggle with. So how do we make it fun for kids? How do we incentivize? What is the motivation to get people to do that? And I think that's really the big question. I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's an important question just to toss out to the room. But certainly from an education perspective, things that are really important that we can look at, of course, social media, particularly to capture the younger audiences, social media campaigns, and there's plenty of those out there. Like the climate action networks of the world, they all do an amazing job of trying to get that information out there. So we need to continue to do that, but also things that might be a little bit more localized. So like workshops and training, the library would be a great resource for this, so having more eco events and, there's the eco fairs and the green festivals and being able to be a municipality that supports that type of thing. And of course, being able to get people to go out to it is again, another challenge. So I think in terms of community outreach, that does fall in line with a lot of the goals that sustainable-minded municipalities have. So that might be something to think about. How do we leverage our facilities like our library to be able to offer workshops and educational opportunities for people to learn more about what they can do, because knowledge is power, and we need to be a municipality that supports that.
Carmen, thank you. I should be turning you as member ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I was thinking about it is challenging to tell people to, yes, we need to stop using all single-use plastics, but it's hard, when there's so many things in our lives that we have to use. And there's a lot of things that I feel like in my personal life I use because that's the only option for me, or it's the only, so it would be really challenging for me to, live without certain items. And not personally, but there are people who have, medications they need to use, medical devices that are, they need to be sterile, so they're wrapped in plastic. There's things like that in our community that are harder to change, but maybe we could encourage members of our community to make sustainable swaps. So sure, I would say there's like little changes, like, switching your water bottle from a plastic one to a reusable one, but then I find that we get, in the younger, maybe kind of college, high school, I feel like a lot of young people are influenced to buy, I need 6 water bottles. Well, that's not exactly sustainable, because now you still have lots of waste being created, but and the environmental impact it takes to make all 6 of those bottles. So maybe we could gamify it, if you will, and invite youth to make 5 swaps. So they need to think of 5 creative ways to change something in their daily life, beyond from, ditching a plastic straw to getting a metal straw. Well, do you really need a metal straw, or can you just drink out of your cup? So maybe we could challenge the youth to think beyond that, or think beyond a fast food restaurant, because I feel like it, obviously I don't know the numbers or the exact impact of, like I said, it would be interesting to see what Meaford and how we can analyze, if we can analyze the actual amount of plastic waste. But through that, I think we can, I don't know exactly how to incentivize it, but to make it more available for youth to access and see. We could use social media. A lot of youth are on social media, but also making it more accessible, because I feel like social media makes it harder for youth to get involved because maybe they don't know how, or maybe they don't have the access to, but we could invite youth in Meaford to make these changes and show and come up with ideas creatively. I would also like to draw attention to, every now and then I hear about a repair cafe ministry where you can go to a church and someone will fix your bike, or we can invite these people with different skills to showcase and maybe perhaps teach their abilities to others, and while fostering a nice sense of fellowship and community.
Thank you. You hit something there that I just wrote down really fast. You said about young people, and I wrote down that we're looking for other people in our entire community to submit their ideas to this committee. So that would mean that we need to have a format available for people to submit their ideas. We as a municipality have done that on a lot of different subject matter. So what I would really like to do today, I've heard education over and over. I have heard sending out the message, how we do that, on what platform, how do we engage people to educate them. I would like to have something from this committee that the next time Member Ford or myself actually are in a formal council meeting, that we can have a request of this committee for council's consideration to engage, even if it's just on what Carmen has just said. How do we, in our social media that we have as a municipality, how do we open that up? And that won't be for myself, that would be somebody in our communications department. How do we open that up with a timeline to submit these things on what we're talking about? Do you have any ideas on that, to our chief building inspector? You've seen it yourself. We had, when we were talking about our new official plan, people engaged on that and they sent their comments in, but we had to set it up, and we had to set it up properly. And there had to be a really good scope of what we're looking for. So those items we can't fail in. So do you have anything right now from yourself or not on that? I know you're going to talk to us about, the new building code, but is there anything?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think that's an excellent idea. I don't have anything off the top of my head which I could produce and, kind of lay it out for you. But I definitely think there's an opportunity to explore that and flush that out and kind of come up with some ideas on how to get it before council and get some type of buy-in through the general population. That's definitely if it's a lot easier to get something to move forward if you have actually a ground roots buy-in to get something that they believe in.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah. No, this is basically what we've kind of went around in a circle on in here. So we want to do something. We want to get people engaged. We want them to start thinking about this. We want to have an education. We have a platform. So I think I would need somebody to basically say that from this committee, as the chair, I would be making a presentation to council. And I need to have a real specific request of council to make a direction back to staff if they're inclined to engage in our And our platform we have through community, our community engagement platform, which means I may have to spend some time with the clerk to get that formatted properly, even before I, as the chair, would make that presentation. We've got to make it specific enough, but it can't be broad enough that everything just falls through the cracks. So, Member Lewis?
Listening to everything that we've been talking about, it seems to me that it actually reflects my understanding that concern about plastic is actually quite widespread. And I have also heard on several occasions when I've listened to council, concerns being raised at different times about plastic. My first comment is that I think that this initiative, council needs to lead in this initiative. So I think the ideas of setting up a bylaw and actually implementing practices with municipal practices or corporate practices that focus on the reduction of, I would say, plastics at large, but especially if we put in a bylaw that actually limits single-use plastic or bans single-use plastic, then you would see that run through the corporation so that everything that is done, for example, if you have a meeting, you know, you would have a big container of water and several reusable glasses or something that people could use if they needed water, so that you've never seen a plastic bottle at a meeting. I must say I'm kind of astounded when I see that. If I'm not talking about Meaford, but just in general, if you're sitting in a world-class meeting or you're watching a meeting of the G7 or whatever, and there are people sitting there with little water bottles, plastic water bottles, it's astounding, because those are little messages, I think, that if you changed it and everybody had a reusable container, I think it would be a simple message. I think that's it. The other question that I have is really and this would be a question maybe for you to pose to staff. What are the means that the staff use to communicate with the community, and what are the ones that work best? Because if we understood that, then we could perhaps go from there and talk about, I think this needs to be multi-pronged. I think you need to have like an action, like a bylaw. You need to have practices implemented in the municipality, and then we need to be educating the public. So I would say any event that is done by the municipality, if if you had a practice, if you're hosting Summerfest or something like that, you would have reusable containers or recyclable containers, and you would have a special water refillery. I like your idea of the stamp. I mean, all these sorts of things that build a kind of a community engagement, or not engagement is perhaps is commitment essentially to the idea. I think the libraries are great, but I think I get a newsletter from the municipality. I would say any communication that comes out from the municipality, you could easily just have a little quote. Did you know that we are practicing these things? We could get the Independent to write something. I think about the Rotary Club, which actually now Rotary Canada, I think it is, or maybe more, has an environmental, like a new pillar on the environment. So we could get a service-oriented organization like that perhaps behind us. You could reach out to businesses. We have a refillery right here in Meaford. But one of the things I saw was showcasing businesses that have taken up a practice of reduction of plastic in a variety of ways. You showcase them. Maybe we could buy some space in the Independent that would have a story of, did you know that this business is doing these sorts of things? So I think that we need, I guess those are some ideas that I have, just riffing off the ones that have already been spoken, but I think if the one message I would say is we need a multi-pronged effort. And we also, if we're thinking in terms of communication, it's easy for the municipality to communicate with homeowners because they're writing to them anyway. But what about school children or younger or renters or whatever? So I think we need to, even in our communications, we need to have different vehicles to reach the community.
To our Chief Building Inspector.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We do have an individual, she was hopefully supposed to come today and that didn't work out. She had to work on budgets. Holly is our communications specialist. She's very, very good at her job. And she, could really help this committee through a lot of these type of questions on how to get the message out or to get feedback and how feedback would look like and what avenue and tools could be used to kind of do that. And so I'll probably see Holly tomorrow and I can ask her again to come and talk about this kind of stuff, but also because these meetings are fairly far apart.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have actually something maybe a little more packaged, so that maybe at the next meeting she can attend it, and then maybe she can have a little bit of a brief on this, so that we're not starting 2 steps back. We're starting kind of 1 step forward.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it might be, I hope you can tell I'm a little bit anxious. I would really like to get something before council to know that we're really thinking on this, but it's going to be 2 more months before we meet again. On the interim, can I seek a directive from this committee that I engage with our communications staff member to have a well put together format on how we can promote the municipality's culture for us to lead, what we do for our practices and how we can advertise, so that, and that takes us where we now, we're at March and May. So, I mean, at that timeline, I'm probably announcing something possibly in June, and then we're heading into the summer, which is a really important time. So in one essence, I would like to do this now rather than later. And yet I need to be able to have a good direction to engage with our communications expert to all of the things that we've jotted down even today, and from back in October to go over that with Holly, to know what we have at our disposal right now so we can advance everything that we're talking about. I don't know if a chair is supposed to seek that and put that out, but that's kind of what I would really like to go to work for this committee to do. So, Member Lewis?
I think I would be in support of that. I think that for clarification, it would be helpful for me to understand what the rest of the committee think about things like a bylaw, about things like changing the municipal practices, so that we could give you maybe a more specific directive that would say something like, I think in the previous meeting, there was also that, I just raised this point here and I'm trying to remember, but that you would be giving the council a heads up that we would be drafting a bylaw. So the bylaws I looked at were very, very simple and quite explicit. They would be in compliance with the Canadian government's current legislation. So it seems to me that would be pretty easy to do. I don't know how one goes about changing municipal practices. I don't know. That's something I think we could just leave quite open to you. And then, so maybe maybe it would be three things. One is to say we're sort of directing you to to give a heads up to council that we're developing a bylaw. And I'm not sure how we're going to go about doing that. The second one is I don't know how, again, I don't know what the process would be to change the municipal or corporate practices. How does that go? Because it would seem to me that those are internal policies that have to come out. And then there was the communications thing. Those are three, I mean, the communications that we're putting in a bylaw, communications that the municipality is actually changing its corporate practices, and then another sort of communication about how do you reach the community about the importance of reducing their own single-use plastics and other plastics, and then on top of that, an explanation as to why we need this bylaw. And does that
So-
sort of,
So the only thing I will say, Member Lewis, about a bylaw is a pretty serious document. Bylaw is legal. And to that end, there needs to be some really extensive research in order to do it. And what I'm only saying, just from a procedural point of view, basically, this committee started at ground zero. And we will be heading upward. And my thinking on this, and again, this is direction for this committee to tell the chair, that I would like to start off slowly and positively in order to get things in motion so that we can work our way to something. Our Chief Building Inspector,
Chief Building Official.
Building Official.
Yes, official.
Well, certainly.
Yes, okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to express that while I think reaching out to Holly is really, really important and getting her input is vital to this, that any chair or counselor go through the CAO before reaching a staff member. We don't know, I don't know, and this committee doesn't know the workload that individual is under. And there is a protocol for how we kind of go through that.
Yep.
And I don't want to overwhelm her. We struggle to keep staff the way it is. Yep. And I just want to make sure that everybody's on board.
Yeah, that very, very good thinking. Appreciate that very much. Even with our interim CAO, there'll be some good thinking process there. So may we just leave that subject in right now, that as just for myself, that I'll do exactly what our Chief Building Official just said. Hit our communications person and have an engagement with our CIO, interim CAO, so that I can make an announcement of some degree at the next committee, so that they know we're looking at doing an action item.
so the directive would be that the committee directs the chair, is that how you would say it, to following appropriate communications protocols to engage with the community staff, communication staff of the municipality, to generate ideas about how to develop a communications plan on reaching out to both to seek input from the community, but also to raise awareness about plastics. Is that something like that?
Anything further? I think I've got my direction on our starting point, quite truly, on plastics. And I think that's wholesome. And I think that's going to be positive. And it's a right step. It's in a good direction. So thank you. I'll do that. Let me see, where are we at? Next item here. I have down here that we have a request for a presentation from Georgian Bluffs. We talked about that the last time. Member Ford, or do you have anything update? We talked before the meeting, but we need to have a conversation at the meeting.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. So we're still looking to figure that out. So I'm going to be reaching back out to our contacts there, and it is my hope that we'll be able to get something for the next meeting.
And that is because the Georgian Bluffs has something currently in place. Is that why your request for them to come, that they have actually moved through what we're doing?
Yeah, to a degree. I don't have my notes up on me right now, and I'll admit the correspondence was several months ago, so I don't recall everything, but I do know they have made some sustainable initiatives in the direction that I think this committee would really identify with. And part of my goal there was to be able to learn from our neighboring municipalities to see what they've been doing successful in terms of their sustainability initiatives. So I'm working on it, and I'll be sure to follow up with you.
All right, good. That'd be great. So we'll just leave that then, just a way of course, and we can have this discussion about that one if it comes to fruition or not. The discussion on the building code. Any changes and things that could affect us with our chief building official?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. The Ontario Building Code is actually celebrating its 50th year of being actually a document that's been in the province of Ontario. So it's actually kind of a milestone. We're halfway to 100 years, and we've had the building code in the province and since the 70s. Before that, the building code was a bunch of different little codes that different cities had, and some areas had picked up and followed. So if your house was built in the 60s, you might have followed the code of Kitchener, which was, you know, something different, or you might have followed the code of London. I brought the code with me, and this document you see is not thin. It's not small. It's not light. This is half of it. The other half, I didn't feel like bringing with me. This document is the kind of the bones to the building code. It breaks it down into the Building Code Act. So, you know, one of the first things in the Building Code Act, we talk about definitions and what construction means, and some interpretations, what the duties of the chief building official are, and that part of the code has been pretty consistent over the last 30 years. There's been changes, but that's always been there. In the last code edition of 2012, there was objective statements and function statements brought into the code, which allowed the chief building official to understand different sections of the code and allow alternatives, and it was part of an alternative solution. So if someone wanted to build something that didn't meet the code, the chief building official could accept alternative solutions that were compliant with the code. So, you know, for instance, say you didn't want to use something to do with life safety, but you had something that was better for. So an example that maybe you had a fire rated system that was done by ULC, which is the Canadian laboratory, but you wanted to use the UL one, which is the American one. Well, the Ontario Building Code doesn't recognize the UL one, but you might be able to accept it because you could see all the components of that assembly and then make a definitive decision that that was equal or better than, and then use the objective statements to kind of get you there. And that was used in part with the function statement. I'm just kind of quickly going through here. But one thing I wanted to kind of do is talk about a new section of the code. And this was always part of the national building code, farm buildings. So if you had a farm building in Ontario, the Ontario Building Code referenced the National Building Code, and there was a special document that was like 10 pages long. And that's what we built farm buildings to. And in this document, the building code has kind of flushed that out more, and it's, you know, not huge, but it is pretty substantive. And so certain things like what occupancy you can have with a farm building and what types of farm buildings there are. They're just not one farm building anymore. There's 4 categories of farm buildings. One with very low human occupancy, one with you know, silos, high hazards, and then just kind of the general one. And one of the things that's kind of been clarified a great deal is when you have an prohibited occupancy with a farm occupancy and what you can do in those type of applications, which is significantly different than what was in the past. So, and how you have to separate that with a 4-hour firewall and stuff like that. We go through the code, and there's 2 major sections in the building code, which is part 3, which deals with buildings that are of certain occupancies, large buildings greater than 600 meters square and greater than 3 stories in height. And in this part 3 section is a really important section that deals with stuff that this committee will, you know, a lot of the members were here last meeting. I felt pretty passionate about, and that's accessibility. So 3.8 in this code deals with all the accessibility issues. So when we talk about universal bathrooms, like next door, in the hallway, we have that bathroom that was just upgraded with push buttons and grab bars, and the toilet has to be a certain distance away from the wall. And, you know, we have a vanity where a wheelchair can go underneath, and the size of the bathroom so you can rotate the wheelchair in there. And then in the last code was the update of, you know, change tables was added to, so you had to have a clear space for a change table in a future area. And that's in this section. And then in the meat and potatoes section, which I call the other major section of the code, is small buildings, which is buildings less than 3 stories in height, less than 600 meters square. And that kind of picks up your small accessory structures, and 99% of your houses are in that section of the code. And that really kind of, you know, flushes out, you know, how to build a house and what you need to do to a house, from an accessibility, from structural, you know, the bricklaying to flashing to window standards to shingle standards, you know, all those things that are kind of, you know, broken into those areas. The code is a living document. The document is based off of where the government wants to go. So, you know, 20 years ago, they brought in energy efficiencies into the code. So they required a higher R value. 30 years ago, they brought in things like going from 2 mil poly for behind the drywall for vapor barrier to going to 6 mil poly. And if anyone knew that had ever worked with either one of those things, you know right away that there's a significant difference between 2 mil vapor barrier and 6 mil vapor barrier. There are places still in the States that don't use a vapor barrier at all, and they have paper, and the insulation is back to a piece of paper, and they staple the paper to the studs, and that is for climates that are not nearly as temperature extreme as ours, and in our environment that doesn't work. Our building code, even in between periods, like from 2012, which was the edition before this, to this edition, had significant changes on environmental. We went to having a continuous layer of foam on the outside of a building, and where you see a lot of these buildings now have a continuous layer of foam. so that we have a thermal break between the studs and the exterior, and that's continuous, so that so that we don't have heat loss coming through the stud, because a wooden 2x4 or 2x6 is not nearly as efficient as foam or insulation. So like that's the weak spot in the wall assembly for thermal. But having the foam on the outside creates a wall that is a lot more warmer and as a gross product, much more efficient. So the changes in the code, back to my thing just a few seconds ago, was, it's changed from the government requirements, and then there's also change from legislation requirements. So legislation is where you might have a court hearing on a product, or a court hearing on an incident, or there might be a tribunal on an incident, and that legislation comes through and it enacts changes. So 10, 15 years ago, somebody died in a house fire. They did a tribunal on that fire because there was deaths involved. And one of the things they determined was that individual was, I think, deaf. And they couldn't hear the smoke alarm go off. And so now we have smoke alarms right in the bedroom that actually has a strobe light involved. So when it goes off, it actually flashes a light. And if you bought a house, my house, for instance, built in 04, which met the code at the time, to the house that, was built today, the house today would probably have twice as many smoke detectors, because each bedroom has a smoke detector now. The hallway has a smoke detector, but they also have this visual component, and that makes it quite a bit different. So a newer house will be more efficient, but also safer, because it has more safer components built into it, more safety built into that structure, as just a basic rule of where the code has evolved over those past 50 years. So, part 9 is what they call compliance-based part of the code. It tells you what you need to do. And part 3 for a larger building is more objective-based. So it kind of explains what the requirements are, but you got to get from A to B. Whereas part 9 basically says, a 2x4 can be used in this application, or a 2x6 can span this application, or it's much more like, this part will read as directive, whereas the other kind of is more a broad sense of where we need to be. So it doesn't tell you exactly, it just tells you how to get there. So I'm happy to take questions on this. I just wanted to give you a quick brief overview. One of the other last things on this is, one of the reasons Holly's busy is she is finishing up a new report for the building department that we're going to have monthly rebuilding reports going to council in the near future, probably the next meeting, which will actually start the monthly report process again, and it'll be significantly different than the last one. So you'll see that shortly.
Thank you for that, Bart.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Bart, thank you for that. I know it's some light reading. I appreciate your comments with regards to certain changes, like with the phone being a better insulating barrier, and of course you have less heat loss. So maybe with this new Ontario Building Code, could you maybe highlight how this document addresses climate resilience and sustainability initiatives as it pertains to sort of the focus of a sustainability committee?
Mm-hmm.
So this document, every document before this, so when we talk about sustainability or being more energy efficient, every code has moved the needle slightly to being more restrictive and being more energy efficient. So if I looked at a house that was built 20 years ago, the R value would be lower in that house than it is today. What the addition before this code did was it actually had 12 classifications of buildings that could kind of fall under and for energy efficiency. So if you had a super efficient furnace, you may have less insulation. If you had super efficient windows, you may have a less efficient furnace. And there was kind of this, these categories. You would pick one of the categories and then you would kind of follow that. But there was also on top of that, they allowed so someone could come up with a compliance alternative and say, I want to do a performance-based assembly, and then they would tell you how to do that to make your building more efficient and be more compliant and more livable. So that has changed significantly in the last 10 years, where buildings have gotten tighter and have gotten to come almost net producers as opposed to being net users of energy. So one of the things that we saw, in the last few years is a couple of buildings being so tight and so energy efficient that their footprint is almost zero. And that's not every building, but that is becoming more and more common. We're seeing smaller and smaller furnaces in buildings. We're seeing higher rates of R value. We're seeing people use much more advanced techniques on adding foam to their homes, but going with very complex wall assembly systems to achieve buildings that are extremely airtight and extremely efficient. And this code does that. The change isn't as broad in this code as it was in the last code. The last code had a major change in that, but it's moving that needle forward.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And Bart, that's great. And so your comments with regards to you're seeing homes that have smaller, more energy efficient furnaces and things like that. How do heat pumps play a role in new developments? How does it develop? But certainly, how is that in the building code? But like, how do developers look at assessing whether they would use heat pumps in a home versus a furnace, for example? Maybe you could just give us a little crash course on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so heat pumps have been around for 30 plus years. They've been around for a long time. The early versions of heat pumps were not able to deal with Ontario's extreme temperature ranges. So a heat pump works really great when it's around zero. It can kind of manage those fluxes. It struggles when we had houses that weren't as energy efficient and we had serious cold temperatures or serious high warm temperatures, and the heat pump struggled with keeping a house comfortable. That technology has improved significantly over the last 30 years. And to the point where, because houses are so tight now and the amount of energy needed, a heat pump makes a lot more sense. Now, it makes sense from an environmental standpoint. It's still a really big reach from a financial standpoint because heat pumps are extremely expensive. To drill the well down and to bring the coil back up and to actually do the circulation is there's at times, I don't know that number, how many times more expensive it is than to put in a high energy, high efficiency furnace or increase your R value, to go to 80 in your attic space, or to have thicker walls and have more spray foam or a better insulating product in there, or put better windows that have a better R value than, say, the standard window you would get. So going to triple pane with special glazing on it and special thermal breaks all make a huge difference, and that also comes with a huge cost difference. And the building code struggles to try to find that magical spot, but it is a minimum standard. So
Thank you. Member Lewis?
So as I understand it, I think we talked about this before. You basically at the minimum level, you have the Canadian building code. Then from what I understand, a province can adopt that building code or can go a step further in whichever ways they choose, so that that building code could either, Ontario's building code could either be a reflection of the Canadian building code, or it could be Canadian plus. It couldn't be Canadian minus. Then the third, one of my third understandings that you can now, which is what is being implemented, which is where I think where it particularly impacts the business of this committee, is that there are now additional standards that are being put in place by different municipalities, Toronto, Waterloo, Ottawa, there's a lot of them, where they're actually then raising it one more time. So essentially it would then be Ontario plus. So what is your take on that?
So there's the National Building Code that is created in Ottawa, and there are provinces that use solely the National Building Code for their jurisdiction. Some of the territories use the National Building Code as their document to run and do building permits and do inspections by. The National Building Code also tends to be the base code for other codes. So like the province of Ontario has the Ontario Building Code, which uses the backbone of the National Building Code to kind of create this document. And this document will have changes from the National Building Code. So it may be more specific in a certain area, or maybe less specific in an area, or may have additional requirements, or may have less requirements, but those requirements are dictated by the province of Ontario. And the province of Ontario can state the things that they feel are really important to it. And one of those prime areas would be 3.8 of Part 3, which is the accessibility portion of the Ontario Building Code, is a portion of something that's not really in the National Building Code to the same extent as it is in the Ontario Building Code. The Ontario Building Code is much more involved in that area, in my understanding, and I haven't read the National Building Code in quite some time. That said, there are other areas where the National Building Code has a very different take on something. Like in a large building, say if you're talking about a very big building and you have interconnected floor spaces, the way to deal with smoke and to separate those spaces is significantly different than Ontario Building Code. The Ontario Building Code requires that space to have a certain volume. It has to have a spherical object that can fit into that space. And if it doesn't, then you can't use that interconnected floor space because it doesn't meet the code. And the National Building Code tends to have smoke handling and glass separations. So it's just a totally different methodology or ideology that's been in this code for the last 25 years. So, and to the final point of that, because this is a legislation done at the provincial level, municipalities cannot create documentation or legislation that contradicts this document. This document is throughout the province as a baseline. A municipality cannot say, I don't believe 2x6s work in this application in our city. We want to do 2x8s. That doesn't hold up. That's not a valid argument. That's not something I can enforce. It's not something you can create a bylaw to contradict the Ontario Building Code in any fashion. That doesn't exist. And that's been that way for at least the 31 years that I've been a practitioner of this document. So I hope I've kind of answered your questions. I know that was long-winded, but it's not what you want to hear, but that's kind of what it is.
One thing that you said was a surprise to me because it sounded like, and I want to make sure I understood correctly, that the Ontario a province's building code could require less in something than the national code. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. Ontario Building Code is a document that was created by Queen's Park, by the Ministry of Housing for the province of Ontario. It uses the National Building Code as a skeleton or a blueprint, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it copied and pasted the whole document. And the interconnected floor spaces is a prime example where the Ontario Building Code said, we're not going to go and use the mythology of our ideology of what the National Building Code did with interconnected floor spaces. We're going to do our own thing and come up with our own design and our own way of dealing with interconnected floor spaces and smoke handling in large buildings. And, that's totally fine. That doesn't mean that a chief building official in the city of Burlington or city of Waterloo wouldn't accept a compliance alternative, an objective-based argument from a designer, be it an engineer or architect, that would allow for a different use or different application of what's required in the Ontario Building Code, using documents from, say, the National Building Code, if they can be made in a sound and defendable decision. So in the case of interconnected floor spaces, for instance, more than 10 years ago, I reviewed a design done to the National Building Code for a building being built in Ontario, a very famous building built in Ontario. And we used, for that piece of that puzzle, we used the National Building Code because it made that building function. And so the chief, the building official at that time, accepted a compliance alternative based on that. And they had to do a whole bunch of paperwork and a whole bunch of design summaries so that people down the road can understand that that was acceptable.
Second question. I don't know how to put this as a question. So I'm just going to say it as what I know is that the Grey County is working on what they called green building standards, which have now been renamed in a way after consultation with developers and I think also with staff and so on. And they're now calling them future ready metrics, which makes a lot of sense to me because essentially what they're trying to bring in are metrics that enable us to build buildings that are ready for example, the kind of weather patterns and the weather extremes that we're going to be, that are coming down our way or we're already experiencing. So these metrics will, at the moment, the county's metrics are not going to be a requirement in a sense. There are other municipalities, from what I understand, that do require certain things. What they're going to be doing is making it more points-based so that company developers can build things, and they're applying them to developments of, I believe, more than 10 units. Could be wrong on that. I think it's about 10 units. Anyway, what I would like is, I'd welcome your response to that, but I would also like to propose for the minutes that we bring somebody from Grey County to talk to us about that, because they will be far more knowledgeable and far more eloquent than I am on this. The point is, I think that it will address things like the use of heat pumps, different kinds of insulation, that are going beyond the minimum requirement as outlined in the in the building codes that we have. I don't know that the building code, for example, would provide a range, you know, you can have a from here to here. I think this, to my mind, the assumption is here's the minimum you need for insulation. If you choose to go beyond, that's your choice.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So, I would say, before the 2012 building code, there was a minimum. It was, you know, R18 in the wall, and that was what everyone kind of did. It didn't have the foam backing or the foam, you know, layer on the outside of the wall. Now, like I said earlier, there's like 12 different types of categories. And then beyond that, there's, you know, everybody kind of comes up with their own, and we kind of do an alternative solution to kind of come with these hybrid systems that are significantly more efficient than what was, you know, back a decade ago, or a little more than a decade ago. So, yeah, it has changed significantly the R value and the way we're calculating R values in buildings, and how buildings are becoming much more energy efficient and much more tighter. That is, in my 30 years, a significant change. The other thing, though, is sometimes some municipalities or counties will come up with directives where they're trying to explore or have like model homes. Like, so like Waterloo once had a house off of Mill Street that was an old house that they had converted into a highly efficient net zero house. And they showed all the things that they did to that house to make it a net zero house. That house still met the building code. It was far beyond the building code in its relationship to energy efficiency and water usage and sewage and you know, functionality. It was a super home. That was an old house, but that didn't mean, they just didn't follow the minimum standards of the code, and that was not something that they painted in their municipality with everybody had to follow. That was just a project they did to show that this was a possibility. Just as, you know, if a county or a large municipality decides to do or sponsor low income housing or become a participant in those type of functions, then they can have a say, and then that building has to be done in a certain way because they're actually helping pay for that project. And then, you know, they want that project done in a certain way. And then they can, because they're the owner or partial owner of that project, they can specify that that building has to be built to a much higher standard. Just as if I'm a homeowner and I want to build a brand new house, I don't need, I need to hit the minimum standard. Minimum standards is in this code. That's what this document is. It's just it's the floor. And we make sure when it hits the floor. But if you want to build something that's significantly higher, you know, and what we're seeing with these net zero buildings, you know, then that's great. You know, have at it. Please do that, because you know, you're making a building that should be significantly more comfortable. And there are people definitely doing that, and we're seeing that all the time.
Well, thank you on that, Chief Building Official. It's been an education also for myself on a lot of things. So thank you. The next item we have is recommendations to council through communications on advertising the refill. Would I be correct in saying that I basically have a directive from item A? Or is there something else this committee would like to speak about on that specifically? Because I was going to talk to what I'm going to do, and specifically mention about the refillery stations, or is there something else this committee wishes to add to that? Because I think I've got a direction from item A. Member Ward?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I was thinking of ideas how we could connect with the youth to engage maybe an incentivization to interact with these refillery stations. So
Okay.
with universities, if they want you to participate in some sort of like a study, they invite students to enter into a draw to win a gift card. So potentially we could even incentivize local youth and students in the area or just members of the community to engage. They could take a selfie with the refillery station and then tag the municipality in it potentially. And then that could get them entered into a draw to win a gift card to perhaps a local business that, values single-use plastic reduction that kind of aligns with this community's and committee's values of
Okay.
preserving the community.
Thank you for that. I'll swing that when I'm having my conversation on the communications thing, because that's another additive to that. So appreciate that. Is there anything else on that? That's good. Item 8. Items for information. Okay, thank you. Committee inquiries. I made a quick note about what was just discussed with asking Grey County to come. What was the right wording? Collaborating with Grey County on green building initiatives.
They're now calling them future ready metrics, instead of green development standards.
Grey County is currently working on.
Right.
So our inquiry would be to ask somebody from Grey County to give this committee a presentation.
On their future ready metrics project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got that?
Linda Swanson would be the contact person.
Okay. Any other inquiries? Okay, that's good. Thank you. Communications. The committee will consider correspondence received by members of the public during each meeting. To share your comments, thoughts, or concerns with members of the committee, the public can send an email to clerk@meaford.ca. When emails are received to this email address, they will be compiled into a correspondence list, which is then distributed to committee members prior to the meeting. The cover sheet of this list will be included on each meeting agenda. The contents of the correspondence list are not included on the public agenda to protect privacy, personal information of those individual residents who send their thoughts and comments.
For you, Mr. Chair, we have no communications.
Okay. Thank you. Basically then, this brings us to our last item about a date for our next meeting. And I had something in May.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Wednesday, May 14th.
May the 14th, yes. And I've had a request to have a pre-engaging with one of our members. Would that pre-meeting be May the 6th or May the 7th? Usually it's about a week ahead of time. 2 weeks. Well, then I'm off then on that one.
For you, Mr. Chair, it's April 30th.
Thank you. And for any member that, gets invited to come to that pre-meeting, it's generally in the morning. And it's held where the planning department and the building department function out of the former library, 15 Trowbridge Street. So we'll send something out. I know that we've asked you, Member Lewis, to come. So we'll send something out then to you. That's where it is. It's in the morning and that's the building. Yeah. So with that, I will at 3:29 adjourn the meeting. Thank you.